So thank you very much for being here. It's really an honor. And as you can see, we appreciate your work and your courage very much. You don't really need an introduction, but I'll just say that Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a research fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, and she's the founder of the AHA Foundation. You served in the Dutch Parliament from 2003 to 2006. You focused there on furthering integration of non-Western immigrants into Dutch society and defending the rights of Muslim women. You've written prolifically on many issues. Famously, your book in 2007 was with Infidel, Nomad from Islam to America, a personal journey through the clash of civilizations that you published in 2010, and Why Islam Needs Reformation Now, which you published in 2015. And in 2017, you published The Challenge of Dawah. And you're now working, I know, on another book. So we're really honored that you're here with us at the Summer Institute on Critical Anti-Semitism Studies. So my first question that I would like to pose to you in our conversation is, I think you're really appreciated. I really appreciate your work from afar for many years. And it amazes me with a sense of humility and yet a deep courage that you stand up to forces of repression and reactionary forces with a dignity. We are a bunch of students and scholars trying to put anti-Semitism on the academic map, on the policy map. Many students deal with issues of racism, sexism, who are here struggling, trying to find commonality. What is your message to us, to faculty and scholars at this moment in history? How do we find the courage to stand up, like you?
Before I answer your question, I just want to say thank you very much for having me here at Oxford, and I'm really humbled to be at St. John's and to be a part of what ISGAP is trying to do. And I also want to thank my mother-in-law, lives in Oxford, and has been here for many years, but is old enough to know, and that brings me to the question you just asked. In 2019, when we talk about courage and bravery, and it's very different, I look at my mother-in-law and I think, God, our father served in the First World War, in the Second World War, and my father-in-law served in the Second World War, and my husband, who's British, is a historian of these world wars. And when I read his books and I digest what these people did, I would say phrases and words like courage and bravery, they belong there. That's not what we are. It's not what we are facing now. I'm a black woman living in America and coming to the United Kingdom, and I'm celebrated. I'm not a victim of anything. I chose to come here. I think I know what I left. I know where I have come to. And honestly, I love it. I love being here. So it's not courage, it's not bravery. I don't need any compliments for that. I feel very uncomfortable with being told over and over again, you're brave, you're brave, you're brave. I'm not brave. But knowing what I know, having come from where I have come from, I think I have an obligation, a duty, to just use plain English, to say, selecting part of the population, identifying them as the enemy, demonizing them, and then seeking to destroy them is a human trait that is awful, and it's wrong, and it's played out everywhere. And doing that to Jewish people, Jewish human beings, anti-Semitism. We're here tonight to talk about anti-Semitism. It's the oldest prejudice if you want to think about it. It's an evil prejudice. It's a monster. And the more I find out about it, the more I think, if we're not able to slay that monster in 2019, how can we face up to all the other prejudices? We thought we did. After the Holocaust, we thought it was over. We said, never again, never again, never again. And now here we are. I work on trying to understand Islamist ideology. And Islamist ideology, like all other ideologies and like all other philosophies, it has a vision of the future for society, all society. There's a utopia in place. And part of that utopia is to make the world free of Jews, free of the state of Israel. And if we don't talk about that, if I don't, I feel, I don't think it's courage or bravery or anything like that, but I do feel that it is an obligation to say, isn't this what the other utopias promised? Isn't this what they told us? If we only eliminated the Jews among us, everything would be right. Before I answer your question, I just want to say thank you very much for having me here at Oxford, and I'm really humbled to be at St. John's and to be a part of what ISGAP is trying to do.
I'll say, last week we were at a conference, some colleagues and I from ISGAP.
Yeah.
We're part of a conference here in Oxford University. And we were an amazing group of scholars. One on our panel was a former member of the Knesset, Avram Nagusa, originally from Ethiopia,
Yeah.
a scholar, Yossi Shein from Israel, wonderful colleagues and scholars from the United States. 3 of us were Jewish, 5 people were of African origin, African American,
Oh, yeah.
and Jewish and African. And at this conference we were ambushed. We were the ISGAP, Zionist, racist,
Yeah.
colonial settlers. I was with my colleague Ansel Brown listening in disbelief as people publicly at a university event were actually referring to my colleagues of African origin as the, I hate to say it, but as the ISGAP Negroes. And that the Zionists were paying to take over this department and the like. And we were stunned. We were shocked. Even though we know these things intellectually, when it happens to you, I think we were all really shocked. And some of us reacted in various ways.
Right.
So what do you, when anti-Semitism is now, I think it's gaining momentum in the academy.
Yeah.
The universities are becoming purveyors of this hatred.
Yeah.
A generation is being schooled and educated by more and more scholars who have this worldview. How do you deal with it? What is a strategy to deal with this at an intellectual level, to deal with this new hatred that seems to be increasing exponentially?
I would say, what a fantastic question, to which obviously I do not have an answer. Again, I will modestly say, when I point out, look, what so-and-so has said, a fellow professor, a fellow colleague, that to me comes across as blatant anti-Semitism. People will say, well, they're coming out of the woodwork. I get an education on how European anti-Semitism has never gone away. It has gone underground, but it has never gone away. I get an education on that all the time. People point that out to me. But where do they get the license? And as long as you use the language of social justice, and now we are in this realm where I brought you this book because you'll all ask me, what is social justice? I'm going to be 50 years in about 5 months. And the word woke to me is, it's new and foreign. It's like asking me to learn Mandarin. But there is this movement, the social justice movement, and it's coming from the far left, they've always been there. I understand Marxism, I understand Leninism, I understand Trotskyism, even though I can't pronounce it. And I understand their form of anti-Semitism. But what this young generation of millennials are doing is they're saying they're fighting for the planet, they're fighting for minorities' rights, they're fighting for women, they're fighting against oppression. And what the Islamists are doing is they're embedding their anti-Semitism in that language. And so now you have this crazy alliance between the woke people and the anti-Semites on the left who were hiding their anti-Semitism before, or it wouldn't be, I mean, look at what's going on with the Labour Party, which, by the way, has got many Jewish members and I would say prominent members. So it is, I think I'm a classical liberal. What attracted me to institutions like Oxford is reason. It is the ability that human beings are able and capable, and that's what differentiates us from animals, is that we can reason our way out of problems. And so applying that reason, I think maybe the first step is to simply expose the problem. People try to medicalize things, and I hate to do that, but I'm going to do it now. You can't fight and defeat cancer if you don't understand cancer cells, the molecules, things that cause it. So all these people in labs who are trying very hard to fight this problem have to make the problem as explicit as they possibly can. HIV, malaria, all of, let's say, what nature throws at humanity. But when there's a challenge that human beings throw at one another, we try to fuzz things up. We obfuscate. And I think the first step is to say, what are we talking about? That is why I call this the special case of Islamist anti-Semitism. I know that institutions like Oxford are familiar with anti-Semitism. God, how many scholars have I met who have educated me on what anti-Semitism is? But then there's this special problem, and it puzzles me that they don't want to name it. And if you don't name a problem, if you don't define a problem, if you don't look at all the different perspectives, then how on earth can you ever address it?
It's very well said, and interestingly, in this conference that we attended, the university came out for academic freedom and freedom of expression, and freedom of association, but they never mentioned the issues of anti-Semitism and racism, which were prevalent at that meeting and overt. That's it.
Well, I really think we should be honest about what is going on. I witness what you witness in Germany, I witnessed it in the Netherlands, I saw it in France, the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, the Democrats in the United States. What we are seeing is center-left parties, for whatever reason, and maybe for a complex set of factors, they're going in a direction that, in my view, center-left parties, we call them Labour in this country. So you must think about it. These are parties during the Industrial Revolution. They genuinely, those movements were about how can we lift poor people. Children were being subjected to working adult jobs for long hours. People's injury, you know the history of these parties. And now these parties have been infiltrated, infected, if you will, with ideas, again, that pose as social justice, equality, you name it, which is really an excuse for power, an excuse for authoritarianism, for not having to answer to anyone, for a destruction of what we call freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of association, the free enterprise and free politics. It's very sad, but it looks like we thought in 1989 we defeated the Soviet Union, and now here we are in 2019. And I think for whatever reason, they have infected us with something in our universities and political parties, especially the center-left parties. And there, how can we say we are the winners? We're not the winners, we are the losers. And the Islamists are exploiting this. Because when you say Dawlat al-Shar'iyya, the state of Sharia, or Islamic law, to achieve that authoritarian utopia through the institutions, people in the media and in politics call it peaceful, but it's not peaceful. It's just non-violent until, in their words, this is quote unquote, it is non-violent until violence is necessary. And this is exactly what they did in Egypt, in Tunisia, even in Somalia, in Iran, anywhere where the Islamists have prevailed. It's always started with dawah. Raise your hand if you know what dawah is. Wow, this is an educated audience. When I'm in the United States of America and I have an audience, sometimes 500, it doesn't matter, large number of people, I ask them, do you know a jihad? All the hands go up. Do you know what dawah is? 2, 3, 4 hands. So I think the University of Oxford is still doing something right. If you know what dawah is, if you know what the dawah is, it's the phase that precedes Sharia. And if you don't understand that, you're a fool. And not just a fool, as an institution that is supposed to educate young minds on what the trending ideas and ideologies are, you are a failure if you don't know what dawah is. You make a good point there. And I really want to make it, I want to clarify, you're absolutely right. And I want to repeat it. I am not saying that the problem on center-left parties and their anti-Semitism is caused by Islamist it was there. But what the Islamist anti-Semites are doing is they're giving them an excuse to come out of the woodwork. Remember, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, it was the never again. We're not going to do this. This is the kind of thing that you can't say, you can't do, it's wrong, it's immoral. And then what happens with, I would say after Yasser Arafat and Bill Clinton come out and they can't make a deal and the Intifada starts, the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, many of the left-wing parties, some of their members, I lived in the Netherlands, a woman who was married to the central banker put an enormous flag of Palestine right in front of she lives in a Jewish community. She put it out there. She couldn't have done that if she hadn't thought that she was going to, I don't think her anti-Semitism was caused by Islamism or Muslim. She had it. She was an anti-Semite to begin with. But she thought she had the license to come out of the woodwork by now claiming that she's fighting for the rights of the Palestinians. Number one. Number two, what Labour and the other left-wing parties have laid to waste. I know in this country Tony Blair is hated, but I think what Tony Blair is doing is to say, let's go back and say, we don't want to be anti-Semites again. He's doing a really good job. Don't give these people an excuse to come out of the woodwork and be anti-Semitic because they are protecting a minority. They're not protecting a minority. This particular woman has absolutely no interest in the well-being of Muslim minorities, no interest whatsoever. She found a way to come out and say things that, I'll give you a few statements. They control everything. It's their money. They pull the strings. It's the dollars. that's the sort of thing that she was then able to come out and say, which we thought after 1945, we're not going to do that again. We're not going to take a subsection, a very small and vulnerable subsection of our population and throw them to the wolves. And she's doing it. So I'm not saying that, I'm not saying Islamists caused it. What I want to point out is Islamists are exploiting it on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're being helped. They're being helped by the existing European anti-Semitism. I mean, they're propagating the elders of Zion. Why? How is that possible? How would an Arab, a Saudi Arabian, or a Tunisian, or a Somali person even know of these pamphlets? But now they're everywhere, in every language, with all the stereotypes. How did that happen?
Thank you, Professor Ali. It's an honor and a pleasure to stand this close to you. Yes, I think what you say about the Islamist...
The special case of Islamist Antisemitism, yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot of money, the scale is huge, they're making use of social justice, the prevailing social justice narrative, and yeah, they set moral traps.
Yeah, and it seems to me they not only enable the other anti-Semites, as an example you give, to come out, but and in the discourse of social justice, is there not the implication that not only is it permissible, it's morally desirable?
Yeah.
That it's cloaked in righteousness.
That's the social
and
justice.
It becomes not only fashionable, but socially required, and especially on college campuses, when young people want to be good.
Yeah.
They want to be moral. They want to stand up for those who are vulnerable, those who are weak.
Yeah.
And that, in a way, I mean, ask me, tell me your view on this. Is it the case that sometimes, especially in the young, what is good in them is exploited?
Yeah.
To these nefarious ends?
That it's the problem on the United States campuses. I don't know. Look, I don't know if we have this problem in Oxford and in Cambridge, and I've been reading the British newspapers, and I see that some of it is seeping into here, disinviting people for their opinions, that sort of thing. I thought, the British, they have that stiff upper lip. They're dignified. They're not supposed to, you don't go out and say, I'm offended. You'd be laughed at if you were offended all the time. So I don't know how big of a problem it is in the UK. When I go around my friends and I ask them, do you know what woke is? They don't know what woke is. But most people in my environment in the US know what woke is. And they're inhibited by it. And they feel trapped. And people don't feel that they can be honest and that they can tell the truth. And this, for a while, about 8 or 10 years, I thought it's a problem that's in universities, college campuses, and that once these students get out into the real world, they'll be confronted with the real world. But now I see corporations, the United States government, they're all going woke. And so that's when you have to think, God, this is a problem, and we can't laze about and just think things are going to fix it. She'll grow out of it. You can't say that anymore. So you're absolutely right. This is going on, and to be very specific about what you're saying, in the woke narrative, there's a matrix of victims. Everybody is victimized by the white man. Now, to stick just with the subject of anti-Semitism, because that's what we're to talk about here. I'm not here to talk about woke culture and all its problems. I just want to talk about anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism is now a white man. Can you just even believe how this has been warped? A white man, there's a white man in military uniform, IDF of Israel, and so it is a white privilege problem. I remember reading an article somewhere with a young person, a kid, Princeton, who said he was accused of being, he didn't understand things because he was suffering from white privilege. And he responded to that and said, well, both of my grandparents died during the Holocaust. My parents escaped the Holocaust. How on earth could you think of me as having white privilege? And when they went to America, they had to start from scratch. And I think he was the first of his generation to go to college and to go to Princeton. So what does white privilege mean in that context? I have Irish friends who say that they fled Ireland. They blame the English for everything. But that's okay. And they came and they said they were subjected to the most humiliating circumstances. And now they're being accused of enjoying white privilege. So the narrative of this whole woke social justice nonsense, it doesn't make sense. No one is standing up to them. It is sickening and it's disturbing and it's alarming that institutions like universities keep caving in and in and in. I think it is perfectly possible to fight racism, segregation, to give homosexuals and transgender people their place, their dignified place in society, without having to sacrifice what we have achieved, what our civilization has achieved. And I think going back to anti-Semitism, making anti-Semitism trendy again is really the wrong way to go.
Ms. Ali, first of all, you're a hero to me, so thank you for being here. You talked about the woke culture and America, and I just wanted to get you, I don't know if you are aware of how deep it is in the culture as far as the music and just sort of the social currency that it carries.
Yeah.
As far as if you're outside of that, then your voice is really, it doesn't hold the weight.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is that most of our students want to be part of something.
Yeah.
So if you're opposing it, then you become sort of a pariah and so I think, just to add on to that, I think that's, to me, as a college student in the U.S., is something that I see. And so when you have freshmen coming up that are still trying to find themselves, then of course, what do? I want to be part of the in crowd.
Yeah.
And so that becomes sort of a battle in itself to be identifying with something, like Dr. Patterson said, something righteous, something moral. So I just wanted to add on to the woke section. Thank you.
Carlton? So Carlton Long is he's in charge of pedagogy, and we've developed this program at Oxford together.
Thank you very much for being here on behalf of the participants of I think the Wiesel King Scholars, a new group of students who are multicultural, multinational, and have varying degrees of expertise, and also have a great degree of concern and curiosity, intellectual curiosity, moral integrity around issues of oppression of all kinds. And particularly in our conversations this week and next week on the issue of not just anti-Semitism classically, but also contemporarily in its many manifestations. So I would like to ask you, not for myself, but for our future future leaders, to give them your best thoughts. One of my wonderful mentors is here, and at that institution where I met him, there was something called a last lecture. And it was a phenomenal idea. The idea was that, here, you've been a professor for a long time, and let's imagine that you're going to present the last lecture of your career.
Mm-hmm.
What are the takeaways from all of your knowledge, all of your thinking, all of your life experience that you would like to hand over to those who are coming behind you? So I would like to ask you if you might give us, in your own way, what you might say in your last lecture.
Mm-hmm. I think you deserve applause. Critical thinking. And that's also what this young man asked about music. That's what it amounts to. If you have been to Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or Stanford or any of those supremely expensive universities, and you haven't walked out 4 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, and you are incapable of thinking critically, then these institutions have failed. My last lecture would say, going to these institutions as a freshman, you don't know anything about the world. Don't treat them like daycare centers. It's not. You go and learn to think, how to think, not what to think. That would be my last lecture. And I'm grateful to my professors at the University of Leiden for giving that to me. Music. I would say it would be amazing if you came up with something that goes against the grain.
We use them in my company
Yeah.
called LAMP, Literature, Art, Music, Philosophy.
Yeah, literature, art, music, philosophy. If in all of those fields and in science and everything, you have to add, you have to be able to add to what we already know. And if you find yourself constrained by the prevailing orthodoxy, and now the prevailing orthodoxy is this, it's woke. It's not even an orthodoxy. It has no sense of coherence. It's silly. It's backwards. But if you find yourself constrained by the prevailing orthodoxy, then fight it. And if you can't fight it, leave, let others do it. But the institution survives and the institution thrives. And those who come to the institution survive and thrive, and I don't know, if they stand up to the prevailing orthodoxy. So this whole thing about, oh, Jordan Peterson is invited to come to the University of Cambridge, and then he's disinvited. This particular individual is invited, and then he's disinvited. That is, you know, I would say if I look at history and think, God, those days they actually had to deal with the Pope, they had to deal with kings and queens, they had military, you know, you had to deal with Stalin, for heaven's sake. And now you're saying, I'm going to nix my entire research program because somebody's going to call me a racist. And I think that's wondrous. Yeah, I can see all of us, people coming from Africa, we think that just name calling, they're not going to kill you. They're not going to take your head off and run away with it. They're not going to kill your entire family. They're just going to call you racist and you're going to call off the whole thing? Come on.
A young Wiesel King scholar.
Yeah.
And he's extraordinarily talented poet, musician. And in 4 minutes, he has a video, and in 4 minutes, he encapsulates, I think, the knowledge and wisdom that takes scholars about 3 hours.
And if I say, I like your hair, will you call hash at me too?
So first, I'd like to say thank you so much for being here. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to hear you speak, and especially I appreciated the part about including other types of creative mediums as far as countering So my question is actually about anti-Semitism and kind of where you think it stems from.
Yeah.
So growing up as an American Jewish person, as an American Black person, and dealing with racism and anti-Semitism, oftentimes it does stem from certain types of colonialism or imperialism. And I was wondering, to what extent do you think that anti-Semitism coming from the left stems from kind of a Eurocentric viewpoint that doesn't acknowledge that Jews and other African and Middle Eastern ethnic minorities and religious minorities experience similar types of anti-Semitism, and then kind of as a follow-up, or similar types of colonialism and imperialism that reinforce this bigotry? And then as a follow-up, to what extent do you think we kind of communicate that and bring that story to light?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, there are so many flavors of anti-Semitism, I don't know where to begin it. On the right, there's all this, the Arianism, the Catholic Church, the Jews betrayed Jesus, the religious part of that. Anti-Semitism has been around for so long. And I really think we should put out a reading list on experts who have looked at every single segment of the source of anti-Semitism. With the Islamists, what I see are two things. There's the use of theology. First, they'll quote or cite the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. They will say the Prophet Muhammad trusted in Jews and they betrayed him, and therefore he had a license to kill them. That is carried on to that day. That's sort of the theoretical framework, or the underpinning for that. And then there's the whole Palestine-Israel thing. That's what I've studied. That's what I've understand. That has come to me as a child. I've never seen a Jew before in my life until I was 24 years or something like that. I come from a country that is not geographically is not a neighbor of Israel. We are not affected. If you live in Somalia, you're not affected by Israel or Israeli politics. And so, in a way, I did think, when I was made to think a little bit more curiously, to come to understand this particular prejudices, then why on earth do I hate them? I don't even know what they look like. I don't know who they are. My cousins, I hate some of them. They hated me for a reason, because we fought over a water hole. We fought over wives. We fought over horses. We fought over property. There was a reason to hate because of proximity. But we have no proximity. If you live in Somalia or in Pakistan or in Afghanistan or in Indonesia, you have no proximity with Israel or Jewish people. So then why do you hate them? And when you reflect on that, that is when you come to understand, anti-Semitism. I had never heard of the word anti-Semitism until I was 24. Now, you go to colonialism, imperialism, I think that when Britain was an empire, Britain did a lot of good things, and some bad things happened. In my age, and where I come from, we think it's a shame and a scandal that we can only talk about what went wrong and can never talk about what was right. And it's one of these things. It's one of these crazy things. Woke people are making us not study these things, So the question of imperialism, colonialism, Eurocentrism, whatever, I think it's a much more complex. And when, I don't know, I hope when things become more agreeable, we may be able to reflect on the pluses and the minuses of what we've inherited from those years. How we can compare, say, French imperialism to Anglo-imperialism, that sort of thing. And where does anti-Semitism fit into that? I just want to point out the British fought Hitler, and that says something for them.
Thank you. Professor Amy Ellman in the back. Thank you. Well, you're going to run.
I cannot hear what
you
you're
talk louder.
And you are Amy.
Amy.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. I was wondering if you could connect some of the, if you want to with this part, if you want to connect some of your considerations with woke,
Yeah.
to something that you said at the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
when you tried to share with us a little bit about what was going to happen prior to Sharia.
Yeah.
Because I think that this emphasis on woke and what's happening prior to Sharia are deeply interconnected.
Absolutely.
So I was wondering if you could elaborate on these parallel tracks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I honestly think somebody could do a PhD on that, and they should. When the Ottoman Empire came to an end, some of those in the leadership roles were saying, what did we wrong? What did we do wrong? What went wrong? What happened? And some went obviously in the direction of, let's westernize, let's become European. The Europeans have colonized us, they've invaded us, they won, so let's be like them. But the other side said, no, let's go back, because we failed to be an empire ourselves, because we abandoned what was originally ours, what was authentic. And that is to go back to pure Sharia. So the narrative ever since, end of 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the narrative ever since of those Islamists was, let's go back. But in saying, let's go back, when they look in the mirror, they don't see themselves. They see the Europeans, the white man, penetrating, taking, imposing, colonizing, and all the rest of it. And that's the narrative that they pushed. Then along come the Bolsheviks and the Stalinists, and it's the same. I think they do find some kind of a rhyme there. So the left, the far left, alliance, dalliance, whatever you want to call it, with those who are seeking Sharia has always been there. It started with the same sort of resentment. The blaming of the Jews and the Jewish people, and especially Jewish thinkers, are being seen as traitors of the cause. They betrayed Muhammad. They betrayed the proletariat dream, the utopia. These narratives flow into one another. And if you care to look in what is now called social media, and you just have to go through the trash, that's what you find. These narratives and the way they impact people. That's why I said somebody needs to do a PhD on this alliance. And I know that some people have already done that, but it is just the way it's moving fast, fast, fast. And I think we need to, I think it's a serious, serious thing, because it's influential. It is transforming, in any case, center-left parties in Europe, in Australia, in New Zealand, in the United States of America. It's transformative. And I don't know, when they look at each other, you look at the atheist far left. In this country, you know Corbyn, so the Corbynist personality. And they go off against Western civilization and all its benefits, and all they see is negative, all they see is bad, all they see is horrible. And opposite them is someone wearing a headscarf or a beard or completely allied with Sharia. But they never get to the moment that ISIS showed us. You remember ISIS? We got a glimpse of it, where it doesn't matter what your alliance was. It doesn't matter that you hated Western civilization. It doesn't matter. They took your head off anyway. And I really think that we need to expose them to one another, that alliance of convenience is skin deep And it's the Corbynists who are losing,
So
on the
Eli-
losing end.
So Eli is a professor at Haifa University, and he started the first master's program in the world on anti-Semitism.
Today we agree on anti-Semitism, tomorrow we'll take your head off.
Grappling with anesthesia. First of all, thank you for.
Can you speak louder?
Second, listening to what you were talking and thinking, contemplating myself on these issues, there's an anathema that I'm unable to solve. A question between what you just mentioned, the innate hatred,
Yeah.
whether it's on the political scene or the religious scene or national scene or whatever.
Yeah.
However you can name it, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the attempt to sometimes deal with it on an intellectual basis. It's as if we're talking about two different languages. It's, I don't know, it's a challenge that I don't know how to grapple with.
Right.
But it's essential, it's crucial, because it's not that these people are waiting for a logical explanation that will settle them and now it will stop. You're talking about that innate, latent maybe, sensation within an individual that only waits for an opportunity to erupt.
So it's not innate to hate, or maybe it is innate to hate. It probably is. Sorry. The innate, I just want to get to that innate bit, which is, it is innate to love, it's innate to hate, it's innate to envy, it's innate to admire, it's innate to desire, it's innate to give. All of this is in every individual, but it is, what's fascinating about human history is you always have these figures that do appeal to one or the other sentiment and are able to, monopolize an entire crowd in one direction or the other. I was in London 2 weeks ago. Everybody was talking about a climate emergency. That means we've been able to appeal to human nature and to say this is something that needs urgency and so on. So, but it's there. You should be talking to marketing experts, to public relations people. They appeal to something innate in us, something we want, we desire. On hating the other, opposing the other, not wanting the other, I almost think that is just as old as humanity. Now, the question for anti-Semitism is, of all those innate hatreds, why did this one take off and why did it become universal? I'm not an expert, they're real experts who have done real, rigorous, quality work on it. Would they be invited to come to Oxford today? And if they can't be invited to come to Oxford and speak publicly or write publicly, how awful is that?
Hussein.
Thank you very much, Ayaan. I'm a big fan of yours. Chris Hitchens wrote or said once, Ayaan Hirsi Ali is the most important public intellectual that came from Africa in the past 100 years. And that was a man who was not known for giving a lot of compliments. So I think that says a lot.
Yeah.
I also grew up in a Muslim country.
Which country?
Egypt.
Yeah.
And
so you are a Muslim, brother?
I know. And I went through a lot of similar things. And I'm going to be greedy. I'm going to take two questions. So the first one is going to be a little bit transcendental. So we grew up, both of us, in a world that was completely operating on the basis of hyper-irrationality.
Yeah.
It was completely hyper-irrational world.
Crazy.
Crazy. And, we have to run away from it.
Yeah.
A lot of people try and they fail, unfortunately. And
And then we came here, and when I first came to the West, I was extremely impressed with Western hyper-rationality.
Yeah.
Right? Because that has been seen as a model that achieved human prosperity.
Right.
But then, right now, I'm not entirely certain. And it seems that hyper-rationality as well is capable of producing extremely irrational products that can compete with the worst dogmas of Catholicism.
Yeah.
For example, the wokeness, that's a product of hyper-rationality.
Gosh, it's, yeah.
One of the early examples, and it doesn't seem that it's something recent, like since 9/11, the hyper-rationalists, the scholars are refusing to believe that this is an act of faith, right? It's socioeconomics. They must be poor. There was an article earlier this year from ISIS saying, we don't know what else, from ISIS, saying, we don't know what else to do to convince Western scholars that we really believe this.
Yeah.
And a lot, the gender anti-scientific movement.
Yeah.
It seems that hyper-rationality is producing a fair amount of craziness as well.
Yes.
Here is the question that I'm grappling with, and that's because I'm trying. It doesn't seem, if that is the case, it doesn't seem that the problem is rationality per se.
No.
Like it's not really the determinant factor. So I want to ask you, in your opinion, what does produce human irrational results if it's not really, if both the hyper-rational and the hyper-irrational are producing inevitably or eventually they are achieving those crazy results. So that's the one question. The second question is about Islamism. There are two main strains of Islamism. It's a wide term.
The quietist and the silent.
And you have the main two strains now would be the Muslim Brotherhood, which is actually primarily, I would say, its most strongest foot is in the United States, and then you have the Salafists, which I would say more in Europe, especially with the Saudi madrasas.
Yeah.
Do you think the future of those movements is, because also Islam is very schismatic by nature, the future of this movement is to cooperate or rivalry based on power and influence in both Europe and North America?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow, another PhD question. Yeah. Look, on the hyper-rationality, I think as human beings we're very, very complex, and it's just not enough to just be reasonable all the time and rely on reason. Reason is just one part of the human story. Let me give you a metaphor. In the United States of America, we are now dealing with an epidemic of addiction. We have about 60,000 people who overdose and die. And when you read about how they should be treated, some of the treatments show them a picture of the brain, and they say, this part of your brain, that's your prefrontal cortex, and the back is the amygdala. The part that wants you to take the drug or whatever it is that makes you high is in the back. It's the base part of your brain. And the part that tells you don't do it, it's suicidal, it's bad, that reasons with you is the PFC. What that tells you is that the human being has both. You have the base and you have the reason, and somewhere you have to find a balance. And society has to find a balance. So those people who go traipsing around and saying, we only need reason, they're going to be confronted sooner or later with the fact that that just is not satisfying. That's what makes the human complexity. So you have to satisfy all parts of humanity, human history, beauty, love, desire, irrationality. There are so many things that are absolutely beautiful and desirable and wondrous and appealing about irrationality. And the same for reason, but there has to be that balance. And I think as humans, we are going to keep grappling with it, which gives you no answer. How do we deal with the Islamists who now are producing this, let's just be irrational? It's just to keep throwing reason at them, keep showing them, we can't, everywhere you apply Sharia, this is the outcome. It's misery for women, misery for children, misery for gay people, prejudice, anti-Semitism, you name it. You are not going to achieve what you promise. So let's find some kind of balance. Then you go to the other parts, which is what is happening with, our own wonderful, affluent, liberal societies that you and I came to, and we thought this is the salvage. Look at the division. There are these countries that are called developing countries, and then there are the countries that are called developed countries. So people in the developing countries thought they would be like the developed. And if you just go away from the material and you think, God, now we're going to restrain ourselves, have the stiff upper lip, be dignified about these things. And now we have people coming around and saying they're offended at absolutely they're preemptively offended. And these are middle class, Western, affluent people. So I think that irrationality hasn't gone away. It is something that we have to grapple with. And all irrationality at some point starts to lean on something unscientific. It will lean on the proposition, Jews control the world. They're pulling strings. Or the prevailing, if you ask me right now, orthodoxy is white men. All white men are to be feared. All white men are oppressors. Women are their victims. Blacks are their victims. They've created a matrix of victims. And you have to know what victim is where and what to say when. Irrationality. It's the prevailing irrationality. But it is something that we have to fight, and it is institutions like this and people like you, Hussein, yeah, you have to, I know you've got to stand up to, the challenge of what you and I have been standing up to, and then the woke people, and then the people who are afraid of the woke people, and call people who stand up to the woke people brave.
So if I can ask a question, so in light of this, there's also a rising nationalism, there's a rising white supremacy, racism.
Yeah.
How does that, is this a reaction to woke? What's happening in this regard?
If you know the history of nationalism, you'll know English nationalism is different from French nationalism, which is different from German nationalism. If you understand these differences and strains, I think you're going to come and appreciate that nationalism is not only something that gave birth to Hitler. That was German nationalism. It was new. It was, but the emergence of the idea of the nation and nation states was a good thing. And it's still the world order that we have. And I haven't come across anybody, regardless of how clever they are, who has come up with a proposition that changes the nation state. They haven't come up with anything else. So until that time, I suppose nation states are the institutions that work. They're not perfect, but they work. They work for now. I come from Somalia. We kill one another. We hate one another, abhor one another, and it's all because of clan. And when the British, the Italians, and the French came along and they forced us into what is now a nation state, we had to make something out of it and create the idea of we have a past together and a destiny and a flag and an army. It didn't work, but it might lead to something. The Kenyans are working at it, the Nigerians are working at it, the Indians have succeeded at it. So the idea of the nation state actually does work. So if you want to throw the baby with the bathwater, fine. There are bad things about some parts of nationalism and the nation state, but some of it, if it's incremental and it's slow and it does what it does, which is the English nationalism, then I think that is something. Maybe one day we could convert all human beings to think of themselves as the inhabitants of one nation called the planet. But that's not where we are right now. That's just so ambitious, so unrealistic, so out of control that I'm just too old. Let's keep our feet firmly.
So I'm going to call on Professor Larry Amsel from Columbia University, and he's in the Department of Psychiatry. So.
Yeah, you're going to analyze all.
Well, I just want to redouble everyone else is thanking you for being here and thanking you for all the work that you've done and the wisdom that you've brought to us. As Charles mentioned, I'm in the Department of Psychiatry, and I work actually with traumatized people, people who have survived terrorism, people who survived trauma. And I totally agree with the comment at the policy level that you made about the first step is necessary to expose the reality of what happened at the policy level. I completely agree with you. I want to go back to the thing you mentioned about the brain. You started to talk psychiatrically about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Good job. I wanted to ask you about the personal level. As a professor who's on a university campus, and there's many Middle Eastern students there, I wanted to ask you, as a psychiatrist, I'm used to the idea that if I can engage with somebody, I can change them. I need time, but if I engage with them, I can change them. The trouble is that in my profession, they have to want to change. That's the one proviso, that people come with the will to change. How can we engage? How can I better engage with students from the Middle East? I mean, Charles has created an environment in which we're engaging with each other tremendously. And the rules of this are engagement. But on the campus, is there a way that I can engage without alienating?
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's really great to talk to our psychiatrists. We should all talk to our psychiatrists at one point.
I won't even charge.
In the Middle East, in fact, I hate to generalize. You know, I've been accused many times generalizing. But I know the context that I come out of as a child, and it is the collective is more important than you as an individual. No sense of self exists. And if there's any sense of self, it's all about the collective. You come to England, you're any part of the West, and everyone is saying, think about yourself, do what you like, you choose. So choice, an individual task, responsibility about the individual, honesty, just saying what you think because it's about you, all individual. And when you come from collective, it's real, it just is disorienting at the very least. Those who survive, and I'm one of them, but I have numerous friends, they lead double lives. There's my life in the office, with my colleagues, with my friends, with my boyfriend or girlfriend, etc. At school, with my teachers, and I hold up the face, and then I go home, and then it's about the collective. I put on the scarf. I do as I'm told. At some point, my father comes and says, "You're going to marry this guy, or you're going to marry this girl," and I say yes. And then you have that conflict, and that is, I think, for a number of reasons why they come to you, why some people just end up in crime, end up in depression, end up with all kinds of mental health issues. And I think we're grappling with that. We're grappling as the world comes to, these encounters happen. This is one thing I think people in your field are going to be confronted, the psychologists and the psychiatrists are going to be confronted with over and over and over again. You'll be overloaded, and you're going to have to grapple with that. And what are you going to say? When I was a translator, interpreter in the Netherlands for psychiatrists and psychologists, they would just say simply to their clients, they call them clients instead of patients, they would say, choose for yourself. And I remember just leaving, shaking my head and thinking, oh, that's not a diagnosis, it's not a prognosis, it's not a medicine, it's a cliche. Don't tell them that. But that's what you're confronted with. That's what you're confronted with. And I think what happens in society is we either choose to come this way. Some of us have voted with our feet. We came to Europe, we came to America, we came for prosperity, and therefore this society explains to us how you achieve that prosperity through individual accountability, individual responsibility, individual choice and freedom and respecting bodily integrity, or we adapt the other way. And if we adapt the other way, and I've seen this in neighborhoods, I've even seen with some of the institutions, that adaptation that way, I'm explicitly against that. I think the answer is ultimately going to be, we are going to have an honest debate about which model works better. And each model has its shortcomings. But I believe, I'm going to give you what I think, and I believe that the model of individual sovereignty and to give that individual a choice to belong to which collective he or she wants to, that is superior to the one that represses and oppresses and tries to make the individual just be a part of a huge collective. That doesn't work. If it did, we wouldn't be here. Somalia has better weather than Oxford.
Ansel Brown. Thank you.
As others have said, thank you so much for joining us here, and thank you for your leadership and all that you do. My question is, what connection do you see between the demonization and bigotry against the Jewish community in the form of anti-Semitism and demonization and bigotry against Africans, people of African ancestry in the form of racism? And what is your response to BDSers who would seek to drive a wedge between Africans, whether it be Africans in the continent of Africa or Africans in the diaspora, and the Jewish community by making the accusation that Israel is a racist, colonialist project? By the way, an equation that was rejected by the civil rights community.
Oh, totally,
yeah. Was raised in the United Nations.
Yeah.
But what is your response to this accusation?
I think it's vulnerability. Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. I think the people with the petrodollars have seen Africa and black communities across the world as vulnerable, malleable, easy to manipulate, and therefore just establish dawah. If you look at the history of South Africa, and you look at apartheid, and the people who protested against apartheid, you're going to find so many Jewish activists there who are anti-apartheid. And so you can imagine what an affront it is to then go to these people and say that they're actually racists and committing these terrible crimes. I think if we lift, if possible, and it's not an outside force doesn't have to lift you out of poverty, but if Africans, African Americans, black people, vulnerable communities lifted themselves out of poverty, and when I talk about poverty, it's not just material poverty, comfort and cushioning, but education and thinking and critical thinking, they would find more in common. They'll have more things in common with the Jewish population and the state of Israel than they will with the Wahhabists and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Thank you.
Asante sana.
Asante sana.
My name is Philip Masila Mutisi, Professor of Education, North Carolina Central University. I'm from Kenya, of course.
Yeah.
I was someone who has gained that stature.
Yeah.
And I love your expression of humbleness, because it's not, you didn't choose it, but we chose you.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important. And your background, I think, is important when we share information like this. And you don't have the solution, but we look at the solution.
Yes.
Together. I appreciate that. I am like you. I chose to go to U.S.
Yeah.
Got married to an American, African American woman, and I took her back home, and she was more accepted than I was accepted.
Oh.
By her immediate family, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Because they thought I was going to marry her for green card. Once they found that I was contrary to that, they found that she was loved more, and when we went home, she never been hugged by so many people she never seen in her life.
Yeah.
And that glued me house in heaven. Because when I came back, they had to come publicly and apologize to me. Our aunt, who loved. So my point is, do you see any possibility of reconciliation?
Yeah.
Because I reconciled I never left Kenya. I just joined America, but I'm now bringing back through the diaspora, organizing, and we are creating, after I belong to we created the Kenya National Council of Elders, who work with the community, not the government. Politicians, we don't want to deal with it, but we're going to create this dialogue, which follows action and the reconciliation. Which, remember this recent handshake with the Raila Odinga of the former Opposition Party, and the Kenyatta, the president now, whom I went to school with, and boy, but now the handshake, it comes from reconciliation, whereby it uses the traditional African ethos and ways of communication. Yeah. And I wanted you to kind of share a little bit about how is Somalia, the Cushitics, the Nilotics, and the Semites lost in a discussion of how we need to deal with ISGAP, with the anti-Semitism. And also, as we talk, look at the last thing we have there is policy. Yeah. Policy, it has to be shaped by us who put those people there. But if we keep blaming, whether I blame myself or you or other, it keeps the field going and the perpetual coming to discuss. But I want you to hit on a little bit discuss about what you see reconciliation, because I have not seen it in the discussion from the Middle East issue, from Holocaust, and neither from slavery, if I think.
Well, thank you very much. I was in Kenya from when I was 10 years to 22 years, so I very much feel a Kenyan. And my Kenyan friends, I was shaped. I learned to speak English in Kenya. I think when we were just amongst ourselves, and there are no white people listening in. And maybe that's how we need to open things up, is to acknowledge what our differences are, what it is that we're fighting over, who's going to get what. And ultimately, we're going to get to a place where we have to face, is there a model for conflict resolution that actually works? And the tribal elders, that work. My grandfather on my mother's side was a tribal elder who resolved conflicts. And one of the proud stories that my mother tells is, as long as my father was in charge, there were no wars. There was a lot of feuding, but no wars. Now, if you reflect on that, you have to ask yourself, does that work? Who does it work for? how long does it work for? Is it sustainable? Does it leave an institutional memory for all that is left? And I'm not saying it's a museum piece, but I'm saying, God, when my mother's pride stories, they're around about a few thousands of people. We're now dealing with millions of people. We have to revisit the story about the nation state. So if you and I, with the white man not listening on, we were just to reflect dispassionately and rigorously on, so what model works that minimizes violence and maximizes freedom and free enterprise? I think those are the questions we should be asking one another. And that's a discussion we're not having, because every time when you ask a question like that and you start to develop a model or choose a model, Singapore has done that, for instance, we are told, oh, but that's colonialist, it's imperialist, it's not authentic, it's not ours. Hussein, where are you? That's what they say in Egypt after the Arab Spring. I listened in on so many of these conversations, and everybody who had a rational idea about how can we go post-Mubarak, the military oppressor, to something new, anything new and good and reliable and worth entertaining would be dismissed as, oh, but that's a white man. So maybe, with the white man not listening, maybe we could have Japan tried it and it's thriving. Maybe we should do what the white man did and just call it black. Whatever makes everyone happy. Minimize conflict, maximize freedom.
Richard. Thank you, Will. Thanks. Richard, can you stand up, because Will doesn't see you.
You have to say we are friends.
So one thing I just want to add to what you said about the nation state is that, in fact, the only institution that guarantees human rights
is the nation
state.
Some nation states. Some nation states.
Yes, some nation states. Like constitutional democracy.
Yeah.
On the subject that you were just talking about, we medievalists deal with issues of feuds and what some anthropologists call honor-shame cultures.
Yeah.
In which matters of pride and, well, as one person defined it, societies in which it's not only permitted, it's expected, even required, that you shed blood for the sake of your honor. And if I understand what you're saying, it's time to put that down. Yeah. And the fact that the Europeans did it earlier than others doesn't mean that it isn't a human endeavor.
And it's a way of, let me confess, Richard and I are friends. And I think he has done the seminal work on honor, and he has done the seminal work on honor and shame. It's just what we talked about earlier. It is, if you say it is to put down, so 15 years ago, I was, let's just put that down. It's so irrational and stupid, let's just set it aside. But as you mature and grow, people don't want to set aside their heritage. They don't want to set aside their way of doing things, their rituals. That's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. And it's not advisable. So I think ultimately, and maybe that's why a lot of people are jealous of the Jews and the state of Israel. It's like, God, how have you kept this up for so long? People should have their to say irrationality, it's not to insult. You talked about, who is the person who talked about irrational? Yeah. It's not an insult. You know, if people want to gather around the table and have a ritual, let them do that. Let people have their rituals and their ways of being together and making a family a family. Let's preserve the institution of family. Because I'll tell you, one of the biggest disagreements I have with my atheist friends is this throwing and just discarding the institution of family as something reactionary and stupid and irrational. And I think I disagree with them 100%, and I'm going to take the brunt for that. That's fine. I think, you may think it's irrational, but I think that the best environment in which to bring up children is with a mother and a father who are married and love one another. If you think that's irrational and stupid, that's up to you. But give me an empirical, and here's where science starts to matter. Give me an empirical alternative that works for the largest number of human beings. You won't find it. And so I find science convincing. You come around and you say, gender is fluid. You know what? It's fashionable, fine. But biology speaks. There are men, there are women, there are boys, there are girls, there's male, there's female. And right now, you don't have a quarrel with me. You have a quarrel with biology. You have a quarrel with science. So, and this is the world we live in. The world we live in, Richard, is where they're saying you can't have the wisdom of the past without what the modern world and technology and science has to offer. You have to forsake one or the other. I don't want to forsake any or the other.
Right, and which in fact gives the opportunity
right.
to do it in their own way and very possibly do it better than we did.
And better than we did. But you cannot forsake the past to enjoy the future. You can't forsake the future to enjoy the past. I think you have to build on what we already have, and that is why I'm against these people, the woke people.
Okay. Okay. So we'll have 3 questions. Okay. Okay. So we're going to collect a few questions together. Okay. Okay.
So I want to thank you for all of your comments. I found them. I wanted to thank you for your comments. I found a lot of them, very interesting, thought-provoking. And I think we have a great privilege here that I think we have a group from many parts of the political spectrum. And I've been very interested over the course of my time here at ISGAP about certain portrayals of the left, whatever that means.
Yeah, that's the way they portray themselves.
And I consider myself a leftist, and I come from circles of a lot of leftist, radical leftists. And I have noticed anti-Semitism as a problem in those circles, absolutely. The thing I struggle with here, and I think it's kind of sometimes skirted around, is it feels like no one has addressed whether anti-Semitism is innate to radical leftism, or if it's just a problem of the people who are interpreting it in a similar way that we say Islamism is a perverse interpretation of Islam.
Yeah.
And I've heard comments, for example, about leftism being, and I think you said something, a kind of totalitarianism on the other side, a kind of fascism on the other side, the all-consumingness of this, the pressure to be woke in politics. And I'd just like you, from your own perspective, to address that question of whether those tendencies are innate to leftism or just a problem among people who are interpreting them in certain times and places. Thank you.
So can you let Lily, we'll collect the question from Lily.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to see you sitting over there. I didn't really know anything about you, so I thank ISGAP for giving me this privilege. spent some time in Somalia when I was with the African Union, working with the transitional national government and the Union of Islamic Courts.
Right.
Because I held the Somalia portfolio.
I'm sorry for you.
Right, yeah, but I'm actually a medical anthropologist as well as a psychologist and a cultural anthropologist. And I want to follow up the question that Dr. Amsel put to you in terms of individuality and collectivities. And I think that that was quite salient in my research, commission research work with a World Health Organization when I was working on the Ebola. And I was in 2015 and 2018. And what I found was a lot of the therapeutic interventions was based on a worldview that was quite alien. I mean, there were people dying right, left, and center. And they couldn't understand that I'm generalizing here, please forgive me, that within the African worldview, especially in Sierra Leone, and even in South Sudan where I was recently, and Ghana, for instance, you cannot talk about individuality. No. Because my individual singularity is embedded in a collectivity. Right. So that goes back, using the Cartesian dualism is, I am because they are. Yeah. I am because, we are. Right. So I cannot talk of myself in a singular. Right. I can talk of myself in a singular as I stand here. But even that is still underscored by my familiar relationship, extended relationship that goes back many, I don't know, centuries or years. Yeah. So in that sense, I was especially happy to hear you say this. And I want to give you the concrete example in Sierra Leone. I mean, there was about 8,000 altogether. I think about 8,000 or so. I mean, altogether it was about over 11,000 that died during the West Africa Ebola outbreak. So it was unprecedented. Yeah. And there was the intervention was so flawed, and that also contributed to the death of these people, because you go to a family and you tell without understanding their worldview or having in-depth knowledge about their culture. Yeah. And you give them this Ebola, EBD sensitization messages. Do not touch your loved ones. Do not do this. Do not do that. And several of them, they told me, we cannot abandon our loved ones because that loved one is sick. It's me who's sick. How can you tell me not to touch a loved one? Right. And one, the most tragic and painful, I mean, there were so many painful incidents, it was really traumatic. But one thing that I wrote a lot about that as I stand here, I'm even shaking, was an elder who died, a family who died, and his sons, they did the safe burial. Right. And so what they did was, after the burial team left, the unified and safe burial team left, and they confessed to the pastor. He said, what we're going to do is our father has not been buried well, because my father's last wish was that I should not be buried in this suit. They put them in a suit, yeah. Right, yeah. Burial garb, yeah. So anyway, so as soon as the burial team left, what they did was they dig up the grave. This was an Ebola cadaver, very, 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 very infectious. They become extremely infectious when they are dead. I mean, so you get, even by standing very close, probably will be infected with the EBD virus. Anyway, so as soon as they left, they dig up the grave. Yeah, it just spread it. Oh God, yeah. Protective bag, and they redressed the infected Ebola cadaver and did all their prayers, and then reburied the corpse. And so you can imagine what happened. I know, yeah. The transmission chain, it was very difficult to. I mean, there were so many cases like that. And point is that without understanding, complete understanding of a people's worldview, and how important it is, the collectivity, not the individuality.
The collectivity.
Because it doesn't work in Africa, even though, yes, we are colonized by the British or the French or whatever, Portuguese or
it doesn't work.
We still have that cultural traditions that is so endearing, and it does not just vanish because you educate. Sorry, I don't want to use the word educated because they probably were educated before the colonial period. They have their own sets of beliefs. So I mean, I'm just really, really happy that you're here and that you touch on the.
Thank you.
So, Will, we're going to take the final question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. First of all, I have a lot of ex-Muslim friends who, some of them live in Muslim countries, and they live completely silenced with death threats and rape threats, as you know. And they get ignored by the society, but you give them a lot of hope. So
thank you.
My question is, in your book, Nomad, you talk about how when you moved to America, it was the liberals who were very uncomfortable with feminism. And I don't think it's any different today with the fetishization of hijab and the return of modesty culture. I was taught in school that burqa is empowering. So I wonder what do you think about that?
Gosh, that is such a thank you very much. I know. Gosh, I'm going to have to start with is it innate, the left, or is it are there individuals who are taking advantage of, let me put it more bluntly, is Jeremy Corbyn the left, or is the left Jeremy Corbyn? I think, I was listening to you and I thought that's probably how you want to put it. And I think it's a bit of both. I think that after the Industrial Revolution, there was a genuine question about how the ordinary man and the ordinary women were treated. And an institution like the Labour Party was on the forefront of fighting for women's emancipation, for higher wages, for people against child labor. These were all very good and wonderful questions to ask. And I think a lot has been achieved. So I don't think we can set aside center-left parties based on what we are seeing today. I do think they've been infiltrated by, yes, the wrong people. But when I say it's a bit of both, I also want to point out that there were always among the left those who demonized free enterprise and political freedom, and always saw the world through a prism of just power, those on top and those on the bottom, and nothing else. Nothing could be negotiated. You will find that history. I mean, I took political science, and it comes in a lot of nuances. And there were some leaders who were very good, and there were some leaders who were very, very bad. And I really think we are now in a place where we have a bad leadership. The Democratic Party in the United States of America, big. I think in a democracy, an opposition party, a major opposition party, is a valuable thing. And what is happening to our Democratic Party is absolutely alarming. What's happening to the Labour Party, alarming. I was in the Netherlands, the Social Democrats, Germany, the SDP, the Socialist Party in France. These parties do have to start to rethink what it is that they stand for now. And they are in a moral and intellectual and ideological confusion. And that's why you have people like Corbyn in the forefront. So that's the answer to your question, and maybe it's going to come again from universities. It's going to come from institutions like this one. People like you will come forward and remind these parties of what they stand for. They most definitely do not represent the general public. You really, I'm talking to you, you're from Sierra Leone?
No, originally from Ghana.
From Ghana, and you represented the OAU. When I was little, we used to call it the OAU, Organization of African, what do you call it now? The African Union. I really feel sorry for you that you had to be put in Somalia.
I was actually in Addis Ababa, but I had the Somali portfolio.
You had the Somali portfolio, gosh. What you said about, and your description, just on an empirical level, if you could please tell your fellow anthropologists here and everywhere else, just tell us what you see. Don't tell us what you think or what your views are. Just report on what is, and that's exactly what is. If people believe these things, then they want to act that way. And if you want to fight Ebola or HIV or poverty, I was in the Netherlands, and loads of Somalis are in debt, and these Dutch officials are asking me, what can we do about it? And I said, they're in debt because they'll take money from welfare benefits or whatever they work, and they'll send it home. And if you send every penny home, you're going to stay in welfare. The collective prevails. So if you really want to get to the bottom of these issues, it's inescapable. You do have to start talking about culture. And what I've seen in the years that I have been here is that people are uncomfortable, supremely uncomfortable to talk about culture. If you don't talk about culture, you're not going to resolve. You can't answer, the psychiatrist can't do his job, you can't do your job, I can't do my job. And then we just keep going, we'll go into the next generation and repeat the same mistakes, and the next generation, but you do have to discuss the superstition. But when the superstition is put on the forefront, people get offended. Why would they not get offended? They'll get offended. But it used to be that you talked past the offense. Imagine in the smallpox epidemic, if people said, now I want to hug my loved one, you wouldn't argue with that. Obviously you do, but these are the consequences. You have to make a choice. You have agency. This is science. And this virus or bacteria or germ is indifferent. It doesn't care about your culture. So do you want to live for the next generation, or do you want to go with the person in the grave? They never ask that question. That is, I think, where you and I come in, where you say you have to force them to understand this. And it will for us. We're going there. Liberal feminism, gosh. I don't want to be fired. I've got many colleagues who feel exactly what you have described, which is if you're a white woman and you have fought for you're a liberal and you're a feminist, you don't say anything about people of color. So the Me Too, they will denounce and condemn Weinstein, what's his name? I'm not particularly a fan of Hollywood, so I don't really know much about what goes on there, but what's his name? Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein.
That one, Harvey Weinstein, and what is the guy from? All of these individual, powerful white men, but they're very, 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 they don't know what to do. Do you know how many women were abused and subjected to the sorts of things that came out? Bill Cosby, there was a black guy. It took them a long time to say anything about it, and they're actually not doing it. And then there's radical Islam. And then, I'm looking at the African contingent there. The view on women in Africa. They're not going to address that because deep down they believe this is something that African women need to do themselves. Muslim women need to do themselves, and so on. And tragedy is, I was raised a Muslim, and I come out and I say, well, this is what's being done to us. Can we stop it? And you are an Islamophobe. So as a Muslim woman, as an African woman, you're going to have to fight on the level of within your own community to change things. And then you're going to have to fight these darned liberal women who are calling themselves feminists, but who are really an obstacle, which is a tragedy. But over a time, we just think of them as a joke.
I want to say, on behalf of everybody here, we wish you continued strength and success, and we're really grateful that you came here with us tonight, and thank you for sharing your time. So
thank you.